It was just after midnight on October 19th, 2025, when the calm skies above Russia's Ural region suddenly erupted into chaos. Without warning, a fleet of Ukrainian long-range drones pierced deep into Russian airspace more than 1,000 kilometers beyond the front lines. Their target was not a simple oil depot, but something far more symbolic, far more devastating: the Orenburg Gas Processing Complex, the largest gas refinery in the world, and a core artery of Russia's energy empire. As confirmed by the Ukrainian General Staff, the drones struck with surgical precision, igniting massive explosions that lit up the night sky. The Novokuybishevsk oil refinery in Samara was also hit, but it was Orenburg, the crown jewel of Gazprom's empire, that turned the operation into a global shockwave. Witnesses described the inferno as a second sun over the steppe. Within hours, Moscow's emergency lines collapsed under panic, and the Kremlin's once unshakable illusion of internal security vanished. According to Reuters, the scale of the disaster forced Russia to suspend all gas imports from Kazakhstan, its closest energy ally. This was no random act of sabotage, it was a strategic masterpiece, meticulously timed and executed. The attack didn't just cripple infrastructure, it cut through the geopolitical backbone of Putin's two-decade-long dream, an integrated Eurasian energy network controlled from Moscow. By dawn, Astana's Ministry of Energy had declared a state of emergency, placing Kazakhstan's entire oil and gas sector under crisis monitoring. The pipelines linking Kazakhstan's vast Karachaganak gas field to Orenburg had fallen silent. For the first time in modern history, the Kremlin itself had to shut off its allies' taps, strangling its own economic lifeline. But this was only the surface. Behind the flames, there was a deeper, colder strategy at play. Ukrainian special operations units, in coordination with a Russian resistance movement known as Black Spark, had infiltrated Russian territory and carried out an operation that was as psychological as it was physical. It was a strike aimed not only at a facility, but at the very heart of Putin's narrative, his claim that Russia's inner regions were untouchable. In a few hours, that illusion was gone. The attack on Orenburg didn't just destroy a gas complex, it annihilated Russia's sense of safety. Every explosion carried a message: nowhere in Russia is safe anymore. And as smoke spread across the Urals, one question echoed from Moscow to Astana, from Brussels to Washington. If Ukraine can strike here, what will stop it from going further? To understand the scale of this operation, one must understand what was destroyed. The Orenburg Gas Processing Plant is not an ordinary refinery. It is the beating heart of Russia's gas network, a complex web of pipes, turbines and chemical reactors that feeds both domestic and foreign markets. Operated by Gazprom Pererabotka, a key subsidiary of Gazprom, this facility handles billions of cubic meters of gas every year, processing both Russian and Kazakh production. Experts often describe Orenburg as the brain of Russia's energy grid, and that comparison is not poetic, it is literal. According to the Ukrainian General Staff statement, the drones precisely targeted one of the main gas purification units, the nerve center of the entire plant. Without this system, raw gas pumped from underground becomes useless, contaminated, and impossible to distribute. In essence, Ukraine did not just hit the facility, it decapitated it. By taking down that single purification module, the rest of the complex was paralyzed. Conveyor systems halted, compressors overloaded, and safety valves exploded under pressure. What had once been a fortress of steel and precision turned into a $20 billion graveyard of twisted metal and flames. But the tactical brilliance of this attack goes far beyond the engineering damage. It was a blow aimed directly at Russia's domestic stability. The Orenburg plant was one of the key suppliers of purified gas to Russia's most populated western regions, including Moscow itself. As winter loomed, that meant millions of households faced the threat of cold homes and idle factories. Yet Ukraine's real objective was even more sophisticated. By hitting Orenburg, it wasn't merely cutting Russia's internal supply, it was sabotaging the energy umbilical cord that connected Moscow to Kazakhstan's Karachaganak field. This Soviet-era system had locked the two countries together for decades. Kazakhstan extracted the gas, Russia processed and sold it. The partnership was worth billions of dollars annually and formed one of the last pillars of Putin's regional influence in Central Asia. When the Orenburg facility went up in flames, that entire arrangement collapsed overnight. Raw Kazakh gas could no longer be processed, meaning it had nowhere to go. In a grim twist, Russia was forced to halt its allies' exports, a self-inflicted wound of staggering proportions. The result was not only economic paralysis, but a diplomatic earthquake. Kazakhstan's leaders, blindsided and alarmed, realized that Putin's promise of protection had turned into a liability. What was once seen as an alliance now looked like an anchor dragging both countries down. In the span of a single night, Ukraine's drones had achieved what years of sanctions and diplomacy could not. They had turned Putin's strongest regional partnership into a ticking time bomb. The brilliance of this operation lay not only in its target, but in the way it was executed. Ukrainian sources confirmed that the strike on Orenburg was carried out by AI-assisted long-range UAVs drones, capable of flying over 1,200 kilometers deep into Russian territory. To military analysts, that distance is astonishing. It means these drones flew beyond Moscow, past the industrial heartlands at the base of the Urals, into the zone Russia considered absolutely untouchable. Russia's vaunted S-400 and S-300 air defense systems, supported by Pantsir S batteries, were supposed to form an impenetrable wall, yet not a single one stopped the incoming drones. Experts from Defense News and Jane's Defense Weekly noted that the UAVs likely used autonomous navigation algorithms that mapped and exploited radar blind spots flying at low altitude along river valleys and forest lines. In doing so, they rendered Russia's layered air defense blind, deaf, and irrelevant. For years, the Kremlin had boasted that its electronic warfare technology could jam any foreign drone. The Orenburg strike shattered that myth. The drones flew silently, likely pre-programmed with terrain-following data and resistant to GPS interference. When the explosions came, they came all at once, a synchronized assault that bypassed every radar screen and command post between Kharkiv and the Urals. This was not an act of luck or improvisation. It was a joint operation between Ukraine's Special Operations Forces and the Russian resistance network Black Spark. Together they turned sabotage into strategy, proving that Putin's empire could be attacked from within as well as from above. The message was unmistakable. Russia's vast territory, once its greatest defense, had become a liability. Every kilometer of land now represented another potential weak spot, a space that Kyiv's drones could exploit, a gap that Moscow could not seal. But perhaps the most chilling aspect was psychological. The Kremlin could no longer claim that the war was confined to Ukraine's borders. The explosions at Orenburg echoed like a cannon blast inside Russia's collective psyche. Cities hundreds of kilometers from the front began to question whether they were truly safe. For the first time since the Second World War, Russians themselves felt the war moving into their own streets, their own factories, their own sky. The attack was more than a strike. It was a statement Ukraine had turned the map of war upside down. No longer was Kyiv defending, it was dictating the tempo, rewriting the geography of fear. And yet this was only the first wave. Within hours, reports began to surface that another key target, the Novokuybishevsk oil refinery, had also been hit by Ukraine's newly formed 14th UAV Regiment, confirming a wider coordinated campaign. The dominoes were beginning to fall, and the next shock would reach not just Moscow, but its allies too. As the flames devoured the Orenburg complex, Russia's home front began to collapse from within. This was not just an industrial failure, it was a national emergency. The Orenburg facility had been one of the main arteries supplying gas to Russia's European regions, including the capital Moscow and industrial hubs stretching across the Volga. When that artery was cut, the entire system went into shock. According to RBC Ukraine, just 1 week before the attack, more than half of Russia's regions, 57 in total, were already suffering fuel shortages due to repeated Ukrainian drone strikes on refineries. Now, with Orenburg offline, the situation transformed from a shortage into a total paralysis. Factories shut down, fuel queues returned to Soviet-era lengths, and regional authorities began rationing gasoline. The timing was catastrophic. Winter was only weeks away. The damage didn't stop at Russia's borders. The ripple effects struck Kazakhstan like an economic earthquake. The Orenburg complex wasn't just processing Russian gas, it was the sole refinery handling gas from Kazakhstan's massive Karachaganak field, a project worth billions and one of the main sources of revenue for Astana's government. When the plant was destroyed, Kazakhstan lost its only processing route, meaning its gas could no longer be purified or sold through Russian infrastructure. Within hours of the explosions, Kazakhstan's Ministry of Energy declared an emergency, placing its oil and gas sector under special monitoring. Financial agencies from Astana to London began predicting massive export losses. Analysts estimated that the Kazakh treasury could lose billions of dollars in just a few weeks if production remained frozen. For President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, the situation was a nightmare. For years, Kazakhstan had relied on Moscow as both a protector and an economic partner through the Eurasian Economic Union. Now, because of Putin's war, that partnership had turned into a trap. Russia was forced to shut off the pipelines itself. It literally cut its allies' lifeline with its own hands. The diplomatic fallout was immediate. According to DW officials in Astana and Tashkent began quietly questioning the value of remaining within Moscow's orbit. If Russia could not protect its own infrastructure, how could it defend anyone else? For Kazakhstan, this was more than a technical failure. It was a strategic betrayal. Meanwhile, inside Russia, the psychological and political consequences deepened. The Kremlin's decades-long narrative that the war is far away collapsed overnight. State TV scrambled to control the narrative, labeling the explosions as industrial accidents, but satellite images and citizen videos told a different story. A column of fire visible for miles and emergency teams overwhelmed. The war had officially crossed into Russia's industrial heartland. Putin's greatest fear had come true. His own people were beginning to feel the cost of his war directly. And as the smoke spread across the Urals, a question began to haunt the Kremlin: if even our allies are suffering. Because of us, who will stand with Russia now? This was not an isolated catastrophe. The strike on Orenburg was merely the latest link in a long chain of Ukrainian operations that had been systematically dismantling Russia's energy infrastructure since early 2024. As documented by Reuters and BBC Verify, more than 21 of Russia's 38 major refineries had already been damaged or destroyed by drones before this latest attack. Each strike chipped away at what Putin once called his nation's energy superpower status. By the time autumn 2025 arrived, 40% of Russia's refining capacity had been lost. Fuel queues stretched through Moscow suburbs. Civilians were rationing gasoline. Soldiers at the front were short on diesel. The country that once dominated the world's energy markets was now begging its allies for fuel. In April 2024, after a similar wave of refinery attacks, Moscow quietly approached Kazakhstan, pleading for 100,000 tons of gasoline to stabilize domestic supply. It was a humiliating moment for a regime that had built its image on power and self-sufficiency. As Forbes Russia reported, Gazprom, once the jewel of Russia's economy, had become its biggest liability: 6 trillion rubles in debt, unable to finance new projects or even repair the damage from previous strikes. The Orenburg attack, therefore, was more than physical devastation. It was the final nail in Gazprom's financial coffin. The company, already crippled by the loss of European markets and unpaid debts, now faced an impossible bill, tens of billions of dollars, to rebuild a facility that may never operate again. According to the Moscow Times, Gazprom's entire investment plan for 2025, worth about 1.5 trillion rubles, was instantly rendered meaningless. Ukraine's strategy was working exactly as intended. Rather than fighting head-on in the trenches, Kiev had chosen to bleed Russia dry economically, using cheap drones to cause billion-dollar losses. Every explosion multiplied Moscow's financial pain while forcing it to divert precious resources away from the front. The result was a self-reinforcing spiral. Destroyed refineries meant less fuel. Less fuel meant reduced logistics for both the army and industry. Reduced logistics meant fewer weapons, less production, and deeper domestic unrest. Putin's war machine was cannibalizing itself, and while the Kremlin tried to silence these failures, global markets could not ignore them. Gas prices spiked across Eurasia, but the real damage was political. The myth of Russia as an energy fortress was shattered. Putin's 20-year doctrine of controlling Europe and Central Asia through energy leverage had gone up in flames, literally. Now, with its industrial heart crippled and its allies destabilized, Russia faced the unthinkable: the prospect of becoming a fuel importer by the end of the year just to keep its tanks, planes, and homes running. The empire built on gas and oil was imploding from within, and the next consequence would not just be economic, it would be political, personal, and irreversible. By the night of October 19th, 2025, it became clear that the explosions at Orenburg were more than an act of sabotage. They were a declaration the war had come home to Russia itself. What began as a border conflict had now become a full-scale internal collapse spreading from the front lines to the industrial heartland and even into the corridors of the Kremlin. According to the new Voice of Ukraine, a confidential intelligence report warned that Russia may soon be forced to import 60% of its fuel needs just to sustain daily life. For a country that once dominated global energy markets, this was nothing short of humiliation. Putin's empire built on pipelines, oil terminals, and propaganda was crumbling from the inside out. But beyond economics, the symbolic damage was even greater. The strike on Orenburg shattered the core of Putin's long-standing doctrine, the belief that Russia could shield itself behind geography, scale, and fear. For decades, Moscow used energy as a weapon cutting supplies to Europe, blackmailing neighbors and dictating political loyalty through pipelines. Yet now those same pipelines had turned into choke points, strangling Russia's own allies and fueling dissent within its own borders. Kazakhstan's elites, once loyal to Moscow, began reassessing their position. What protection can Russia offer, one Central Asian analyst wrote in DW, if it cannot protect itself? The Collective Security Treaty Organization, once a symbol of Moscow's regional dominance, now looked like an empty shell. Putin's Eurasian dream was collapsing in slow motion. Meanwhile, Ukraine had mastered the art of technological asymmetry using inexpensive drones and coordinated sabotage to achieve strategic effects worth billions. By hitting Orenburg, Kiev didn't just destroy infrastructure, it undermined Putin's authority before his own people. The once confident leader who claimed to control the fate of Eurasia now stood humiliated, his empire burning from within. What makes this moment so defining is that it marks a turning point in modern warfare. The battlefield is no longer defined by trenches or tanks, but by energy infrastructure and perception. The war for territory has become a war for endurance, and Russia is losing both. In the orange glow of Orenburg's destruction, the illusion of invincibility died. The images of fire panic and silence told a truth the Kremlin could no longer hide. The war is not at the front anymore. It is inside Russia. The question haunting every observer now is chilling in its simplicity. If Putin can no longer protect his empire from drones, who is truly in control of Russia's future? The world has entered a new phase of conflict, one where technology, precision, and information are more powerful than armies. What happened in Orenburg is not just a story of drones and explosions, it is the story of how a 21st century war rewrites the rules of power. Ukraine's strike exposed a weakness that Russia cannot repair: the collapse of trust both at home and abroad. Once Moscow's might was measured in megatons and pipelines. Now its weakness is measured in silence, in the quiet shutdown of gas plants, in the darkness of cities unheated, and in the uncertainty of allies who no longer believe in its promises. As the energy empire falls, the world watches a rare moment in history unfold. A smaller nation has forced a superpower to face itself, to see the cracks within its own armor. But this victory also carries weight. Every strike deepens the chaos, every explosion widens the rift, and every success on the battlefield demands resilience in diplomacy and restraint in ambition. The flames of Orenburg may fade, but their meaning will not. They mark the end of an era where power meant pipelines and fear. The next era belongs to intelligence, innovation, and strategy. What do you think? Can Russia recover from this? Or is this the beginning of the final unraveling of Putin's empire? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to stay with us as we follow how this war evolves one revelation at a time.